Whenever things flare up in the Persian Gulf, our attention immediately snaps to one thing: oil. We're all watching the tanker traffic, the shipping routes, the prices of the pump. But what if the region's biggest vulnerability, the one that could bring society to a grinding halt in just a matter of days, isn't the black gold flowing out, but the clear water that keeps people alive? Let's get into it. So if I asked you this question, what's the first thing that pops into your head? For pretty much everyone, the answer feels obvious, right? It's gotta be the huge energy infrastructure, all the oil fields and the shipping lanes that basically fuel the entire global economy. And yeah, for decades, that's been the whole strategic game. But the real, honest-to-goodness existential threat, it lies somewhere else entirely. The water that people in the Gulf's shiny modern cities drink, it doesn't come from rivers or rain. It has to be manufactured 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And that single point of failure, well, that changes everything. To really wrap our heads around this, we need to look at this massive, incredible, yet unbelievably fragile system that makes city life even possible in one of the driest places on Earth. This isn't just a piece of infrastructure, it is the very foundation of modern society there. Think about this number for a second. Across the Gulf Cooperation Council nations, we're talking Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Qatar, Bahrain, Kuwait, and Oman, over 80% of all their drinking water comes from these massive desalination plants that turn seawater into fresh water. For cities like Dubai and Doha, they depend on them completely. Now, this chart here shows you the dependency for their total water supply, which includes stuff like farming and industry, and you can see the numbers are all over the place. It's about 18% in Saudi Arabia, 41% in the UAE, and a huge 61% in Qatar. But here's the key thing to remember. For drinking water, it's over 80% for all of them. They are all in the same boat, completely reliant on this. So how does this magic actually happen? Well, it's mainly two ways. You've got reverse osmosis, which uses just immense pressure to force seawater through these superfine membranes. Then there's thermal distillation, which basically just boils the water and collects the steam. They sound different, but they have one massive thing in common. They need a staggering amount of energy, and they have to run all the time. And this right here, this is the core vulnerability. It's called the energy-water nexus. These desalination plants are almost always built right next to power stations. They're basically two sides of the same coin. If the power gets cut, water production stops instantly. The entire system is built to run non-stop, and it has absolutely no room for error. And hey, don't just take my word for it. This is from a US diplomatic cable back in 2009. It warned that if the one plant supplying Riyadh with 90% of its water was knocked out, the government would have just days to evacuate its own capital city. And since then, the dependency has only gotten bigger, but the strategic water reserves haven't. There's no backup plan. So what happens is this vulnerability creates a really dangerous new dynamic in the region's politics. Because this incredible dependency, it's not shared equally by all the big players. And that creates a major imbalance of power. I mean, this chart just says it all. For the GCC nations on the Arabian Peninsula, desalination is everything. It's their lifeline. But for their main regional rival, Iran, it's just a supplement. Now, Iran has its own really serious water problems, for sure, but it gets most of its water from traditional sources like reservoirs and groundwater. And that's the crucial point. What is a society-ending threat for one side is just an inconvenience for the other. In a conflict where your biggest vulnerability is your opponent's biggest leverage, this asymmetry puts all the strategic advantage on one side of the board. For years, this was all just a theoretical doomsday scenario. A line that everybody understood you just don't cross. But that's changing. The unthinkable is now becoming thinkable. In fact, the attacks have already started. This idea isn't entirely new. Way back in 1991, Iraqi forces deliberately caused a massive oil spill to try and choke off Saudi desalination plants. But lately, things have gotten way more direct. A plant on Iran's Qishm Island was hit. Not long after, a drone strike hit a facility in Bahrain. The damage was small, but a really dangerous line was crossed. And here's the really scary part. You don't even need a direct hit. The system is so fragile that indirect attacks can be just as bad. An oil spill or any contamination near the intake pipes can clog the filters and bring the whole thing to a screeching halt. Or just hit the power station right next door. You get the exact same result. The list of ways to take these things down is terrifyingly long. So, all of this brings us to this terrifying paradox we're in right now. The only thing holding back a full-blown conflict that targets water is that everyone knows just how catastrophic the outcome would be for absolutely everybody. So what does that look like? Picture it. It starts with coordinated strikes on a few plants. Suddenly, water production stops. With no real reserves, cities with millions of people become unlivable in days. The response from the countries that got hit would be immediate and ferocious, because it's not just retaliation anymore, it's a fight for survival. And that would spiral into a devastating, uncontrollable war. Right now, that shared understanding, that sense of mutually assured catastrophe, is what's enforcing this really tense and fragile peace. Both sides know that if this line is truly crossed, the damage would be unimaginable, leaving millions in an impossible spot and throwing the entire region into chaos. So this entire fragile balance, it all hinges on one thing: restraint. But as tensions keep rising, and these first few attacks have set a new precedent, you just have to ask yourself, in the heat of a real war, when survival is on the line, how long can restraint possibly last?